So, at this point in the story, Sigurd has avenged his father. He has a sword forged from the remnants of the sword that Odin had given his father, and he has a wonderful horse descended from the steed of Odin himself. So, having done all this, Sigurd is ready to confront the dragon Fofnir, brother of his foster father, sort of, Regin. So, Regin leads him to Gnitaheid, the home of Fofnir, where they find a track in the grass where Fofnir is accustomed to slithering from his cave down to the creek that he drinks from. And there is a cliff from the end of the trail down to the creek that's about 30 feet high, and Sigurd says to Regin, well, you told me that Fofnir was just a regular-sized snake, and Regin says, well, I still think this is within the normal size range of snakes. So Sigurd decides what he's going to do, since dragons are vulnerable on their underbellies, is dig a pit in this path that Fofnir slithers down and wait for him then to stab him from beneath next time he comes down to get a drink of water from the creek. So Sigurd begins to dig this pit, although Regin runs away out of fear. He's terrified of the dragon. And as Sigurd is digging, he's approached by an old man with one eye and a wide-brimmed hat, dressed all in gray, most likely. And this old man says, well, what are you doing? And Sigurd says, well, I'm digging a pit so I can kill this dragon by stabbing him from up below. And the old man says, well, that's unwise. What you should do is dig not one pit, but multiple pits. Dig one for you to sit in, and then dig several little holes around it so that you don't get the blood of the dragon on you when you stab him. Because, of course, everyone knows that dragon blood is poisonous when it comes in contact with skin. Of course, how exactly this is supposed to work physically is a little hard to understand, as dragon blood spray out, like one of those water sprinklers in the ceiling when a fire comes on. It's hard to say, but at any rate, Sigurd takes this advice, waits in the big pit, and then, when Fofnir slithers over it, he stabs into his heart with the sword Gram, reforged from the fragments of his father's sword. Fofnir begins to die right away. The action scene is actually pretty short. There's a much longer scene of the two of them talking as Fofnir dies. And of course, the first thing Fofnir asks is, who are you? Who is this person who has dared to kill me? And Sigurd says initially that he will never tell him his name, nor his father's name. That he does not, in fact, have a name, nor does he have a father. And this seems to just confuse Fofnir. Fofnir says, well, if you don't have a name, why not? If you don't have a father, how were you born? This is very peculiar. And Sigurd then says, well, I will never tell you my name, nor my father's name. I am Sigurd, son of Sigmund. He's just transitions right to telling him his name after he tells him that he won't. But the dragon, of course, Sigurd's unwillingness to tell him his name relates to the notion that someone who knows your name can curse you as they die, right? We have something similar to this in English-speaking culture, right? With my last breath, I curse Zoidberg or whatever. But Fofnir never actually curses him with this knowledge, and in fact, Fofnir seems fairly cooperative. Sigurd just begins to ask him about random mythological trivia. For instance, he asks him what the name of the island is where the gods and giants are going to fight at Ragnarok. And Fofnir tells him, Oskapt or Oskapnir, depending on whether you're reading this in the Saga or in the poem Fofnismal, the Poetic Edda. He asks him about the Norns, what kind of Norns there are. And Fofnir tells him, well, some of them are born among the Aesir gods, some of them are born among the dwarves, some of them are born among the elves. What the purpose of this trivia is a little uncertain. But Fofnir also gives Sigurd a little bit of advice, because who doesn't in this saga? Fofnir tells him, for instance, you shouldn't sail too close to the shore in a storm. Right? I mean, this advice doesn't even have much to do with what is going on in his life. But Fofnir does give him one relevant bit of advice, which is Regin caused Fofnir's death, and he will cause Sigurd's as well. Fofnir also warns Sigurd that the treasure will be the death of him. So Sigurd says, well, I don't trust you, you crafty snake. I think that, every man will rule his treasure till his fated death day. And Fofnir finally dies, prompting Regin to creep back into the scene. And initially he says, well, Sigurd, you've won a wonderful victory. You've defeated the dragon. But then his brow darkens and he says, but you've killed my brother. So Regin is conflicted about this, but he says, you know, Sigurd, could you just do me one little favor? That's how he puts it, just a little favor. Could you cut out Volfnir's heart and then roast it for me on a spit for me to eat? Well, Sigurd says, sure, I can do that. And so he cuts out the heart and begins to roast it on a spit. As he's roasting it, he reaches out with a finger to test whether it's done. And he burns his finger on the dragon heart. And then, of course, like many people would do, he puts it in his mouth to cool it down. When he does that, of course, he tastes dragon blood. And logically, you know what happens next. He can now understand the language of birds. And so he hears some birds in a tree above him talking. Now, in Old Norse, the word for this kind of bird is igtha, and different translators have rendered this different ways. Nuthatch has been the most common way this has been rendered in English translations. But being a bird person, I went around and looked for words that looked like this for birds in modern Scandinavian dialects and found a descendant word used for the wagtail in some varieties of Norwegian. So I translate this as wagtail. The wagtail is a European bird. I'll put a little picture on the screen to give you some of the flavor of Sigurd's bird encounter. So these wagtails are above Sigurd talking, and of course, just like we all suspect when people are talking in a language we don't understand or didn't previously understand, they're talking about Sigurd. And they're saying, you know, Sigurd isn't wise if he doesn't kill Regin too, right? He's killed Volfnir, but I wouldn't kill one brother and leave the other one alive. And in the poem Fafnismal from the Poetic Edda that this part of the Saga of the Volsungs is based on, one of them actually says, one of my favorite sort of threats in Old Norse, he says, I think that Regin needs to be shorter by about a head. So Sigurd takes this advice. The only advice he ever takes from anybody in the saga is from the birds, and he kills Regin. He then eats Volfnir's heart, saving a little bit for later, and drinks Volfnir's blood as well as Regin's blood, for unknown reasons. Then the birds begin talking to Sigurd about another subject. They say, you know, Sigurd, you should go looking for a wife. They tell him about 2 women, eligible bachelorettes in the area, including Brynhild, daughter of Boothly, a Valkyrie imprisoned inside a burning ring of fire, as well as Gudrun, daughter of King Giuki. Well, Sigurd goes to check out Brynhild first. He rides up the hill where her burning ring of fire is located at the top, rides through the burning ring of fire, and finds a person inside in armor. Now he approaches this person, cuts off the armor with his sword Gram, and takes off the helmet and realizes this person is a woman, and it is in fact Brynhild. Brynhild awakens from a magically induced sleep, asks Sigurd who he is, and he identifies himself as Sigurd Sigmundsson. And she speaks a sort of blessing that is related in the poem Sigurdrifamal and often called the prayer of Sigurdriva, or things like that in modern times. Then she proceeds to tell Sigurd why she is imprisoned like this. It turns out that she had disobeyed Odin's orders and killed the wrong man in a battle. She was a Valkyrie who sort of defied the chain of command. And so she was forced to be married, but Brynhild had sworn that she would never marry a man who knew fear. So Odin imprisoned her inside a burning ring of fire, because who would ride through a burning ring of fire except a man who did know fear? So now Sigurd is entitled to marry her. She gives him some advice, they pledge their love to one another, and then Sigurd rides away. There are clearly some threads of this story that had been passed down in traditional oral narratives over the centuries that the saga writer is trying to put together, but doesn't do so completely seamlessly. So Sigurd is going to meet Brynhild once again in our next installment, where I'll also look at his meeting with Gudrun, as well as Sigurd's inevitable betrayal. For now, from beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.